Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hear me, you who steer the path of all mortals, and give sacred time to all from whom you are distant. Your sleep tears the soul free from the body's hold. Whenever you undo nature's powerful bonds, bringing the low slumber, the endless one, to the living. Common to all, you are unjust to some. When you bring swift end to youthful life at its peak, in you alone is executed the verdict common to all, for to entreaties and to prayers you alone are deaf. O Blessed One, with pious vows, with sacrifices, I beg you, I pray to you, grant me long life, that old age might be a noble prize among men.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 125. How is everybody doing?
I am pretty good, and I'm really excited to get talking to our guest.
I'll just make awkward faces the whole time. That's
I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah.
You're fitting right in.
Yeah. Best part of being an audio podcast, all the faces you want. So
I would say, to answer that question, that's been kind of a tough week, because no matter how much you work with death, it always comes as a difficult surprise when someone you love dies. And I lost a dear friend in the last few days, and I would like to dedicate today's conversation to Kellyanne, because they were dear to me, and regardless how ridiculous or serious we are, they would have appreciated it. So.
May the ancestors welcome them warmly and bring comfort to all who love them.
I'm doing well. I got to see Mortellus's presentations at Convocation recently, so I'm also very, very excited for this podcast. And my bear pelt dancing costume came in this week. So we have been working on integrating and such, and it's just been a joy to have it here. So that's what's new with me.
It was very nice to meet all of you there. Well, not all of you, but some of you. I hope you enjoyed my Baptist minister routine, since I had the lovely podium that weighed 2,000 pounds for some reason. How can a plastic podium weigh that much? It was very heavy.
I don't know. I was just happy that we had carpet, because sliding that thing across the floor was the only way that thing was moving.
Mm-hmm. It looked like a thing that would weigh 5 pounds, and yet it was like 200 pounds somehow.
Cabra, how about you?
I'm doing so on the bright side, getting ready for spring. I'm gonna be putting a bunch of pollinator friendly, low growing natives in my yard any day now. We started our first round of seedlings in the basement, so now my basement is the brightest spot in my house. I am preparing to do my first Gnostic Mass, and we have a spring equinox ritual on the 20th that we're prepping for. And I have committed Thelema heresy yet again by writing an invocation to the Lord of Initiation that is not to Horus, and popping it in a spring equinox ritual. So if I'm in the news in 2 or 3 weeks, you know what happened. But I'm very excited to talk to today's guest. I have heard a lot about them, but I'm electing myself to be the hold up, what's this word mean person. So that's it.
In my own case, as Emily mentioned, convocation was what, just a week ago. I've been on vacation and trying to relax, deal with the varying issues and pressures of owning a home, finally getting some repairs done that have been needing to be done for a while. So the electrical is now fixed, the plumbing is now fixed, and the other things like the water softener is forthcoming. So praise the gods for a lovely home. Also, holy crap, home ownership is a lot, but it's getting there. And sorry, go ahead.
I always joke that my home is the home that love and incompetence built.
This is a house from the 50s, so they have some interesting ideas for how things should be wired.
Oh my God, wiring. We had a problem recently, and it's like, yes, I will fix this, only to discover that the builder, it was my grandparents, had cut an old asbestos cord from a stove or something, obviously, and literally wired it into the breaker box, and that was what was powering part of the basement. It was horrifying.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I have a
scary stuff.
I have a friend who likes to say you could get a place for $9,000, but it's gonna cost you that much before you even get in and flush the toilet. Like home maintenance and home ownership, something else.
I get how privileged I am to even call myself that. But I paid for this house with a lot of blood and sweat and tears and child abuse at the hands of my parents. And the house, it's 800 square feet that my grandmother built during World War II, and it's like barely a functioning structure. So we've been making it exist around us for the last 10 years. Sort of an insane process, but there's some necromancy in that, I think.
Keeping them bones up, I'd imagine so.
Giving them a new life, yes.
All of the houses in Pittsburgh are from the before times. Mine's from the 1940s. And so we ended up picking this one because it was the most well taken care of the ones that we had seen. And also it has like the one thing that will make me fall in love with the house instantly, which is like a big east facing window. And it has enough of a yard that Vespers and I are able to garden, but they replaced the knob and wire. The main outflow pipes had all been updated to modern plastic. The roof was less than 10 years old when we moved in, and there's a French drain already installed in the basement. So we were like, the repairs here, certainly they will be easier, or at least have been attempted previously. And then we found out that what had actually happened is that all of the repairs we had seen were shortcut half fixes, and now we're sitting here redoing somebody else's like half done work. So like they replaced almost all of the old galvanized steel pipes with plastic.
So when I first moved into the house, it was actually a few years after inheriting it, because my father decided, I'm angry you have received this. I will drive a bulldozer through a portion of it. Fun times. There was a leak under the kitchen sink, which we go to check out and wind up pulling up some of the floor to see the condition of things. There's no foundation under the house. None. It had been built onto 4 stumps. So we had to dig around it and put stilts under it, dig out all that earth, and have a basement cinder blocked in under it, because it was the only way to fix that situation. So it's home ownership can be
holy
silly.
Shit.
Silly.
Wow. Go ahead, Snow.
When you put the house on stilts, were you making lots of Baba Yaga jokes?
Oh my God, yes. Actually, I don't know if I can share if you have that active, but I actually have a picture of it when it was like that. Let's see if I can pull it.
Amazing.
Yeah, if you can send us a picture, we could also share it with our Discord and our patron members. That would be amazing.
This is very Discord vibes. See?
Doesn't Baba Yaga live in a charnel house? I heard a version of the story with that.
I would believe this.
I mean, sometimes it's a giant bucket on a chicken leg. Sometimes it's a cottage on chicken legs.
I like to imagine it as like that KFC in Marietta, Georgia, that looks like a big chicken, but on stilts. That would be very, very amusing.
I'm pretty sure, there's lots of skulls and bones in the house and stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Charnel House version.
I mean, there also are in KFC.
So let's see, here's a picture of when it was first built in chat for all of you. And let's see. Here's one of it on stilts.
Amazing.
I live in a part of the world where the dirt is red. We have that, this is Ultisol soil here, so it's like a rich clay deposit, which is also sort of nightmarish, but
So for those who are listening to this, what we're looking at is the last picture is a very old 800 square foot house with reddish exterior exposed studs and a reddish, almost blood red, I would say, soil. It almost looks like ochre.
oh yes, it's very dark.
It's amazing. There's a single cross beam under the roof that I can see, and this you can definitely see why it's on stilts. The stilts look to be, if you've ever seen a Baba Yaga house, it honestly looks like that, except for with skinnier legs.
Any second now, it's going to get up and walk off.
It's a shady at best situation. And what I'm about to stain my hands up, but I have some graveyard dirt I collected just the other day from a cemetery adjacent my home. And just to show you how very red the soil is.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, for reference, this is almost blood red earth that Mortellus just showed us.
If you've seen that movie Crimson Peak, when it snows here, it does seep up through the snow like that, which is very unusual.
On that note, do we want to go ahead and introduce Mortellus?
Yes,
So
please.
yes, and just before we do, anyone unfamiliar with Mortellus and their work, it might be worth mentioning that the topic of death is going to come up. Topics of assault and sexual assault may well come up, depending on where the conversation goes and what our guest feels comfortable with going into. Death, potentially suicide, things of that nature may very well come up. So if that is an issue, keep that in mind when listening to this. Either live or after the fact when the recording goes out. And then if you don't mind, I'll just read you a little description off the back of my copy of The Bones Fall in a Spiral.
Of course.
So Mortellus is a mortician, medium, necromancer, British traditional Wiccan/witch, as well as high priestess of the Coven of Leaves, a Gardnerian training group. They reside in Western North Carolina with their partner, children, and dog, where in addition to managing their blog, A Crow and the Dead, writing and creating unique luxury ritual goods, they just wish they had more time to play TTRPGs and make pottery. They can be found on their website at mortellus.com. So on that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for doing that for me, because I'm very terrible at being a used car salesperson for myself.
Don't worry. We have a section in the show where we will make you plug your pluggables again. Don't worry. Like, I actually put it in the script because I am terrible at it, and I've been doing this for years.
Yes. There's just something deeply awkward about it. I'm just sort of, I don't know. It's like, no, actually don't perceive me ever. I'm just sort of delighted if people find me and care.
That's why I like winding up Sarenth every opportune moment. I'll be like, oh, hey, don't you have a Patreon where people could find out more?
Why, yes. No, I do.
Also, what kind of pretentious twattery does luxury ritual goods sound like? I had no way to make it sound like, no, this incense won't come to you in a Ziploc bag with a paper staple to it. It's like,
honestly,
Listen, in your defense, when I order the really fancy astrological incense from like the place where all of the local Thelemites get their stuff from, it does come in a little baggie with a sticker.
right.
And it works amazing.
of course it does. It's amazing. But a lot of people don't know my first college degree was in graphics and advertising, so I care a lot about my like pretty boxes and stuff. So
I feel as a fellow associate with graphic design holder, yeah, I get it. Like, it needs to be pretty, damn it.
I joke that I never went to elementary, middle, or high school. I have no high school diploma, no GED, but I have 4 college degrees. That's
Nice.
silly nonsense from my backstory, but graphics and advertising from a community college, a bachelor's in graphic design from SCAD. Sounds like an STD, but no, it's just a lot of student debt. And mortuary sciences in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and took a degree in education at the same time because I am clearly a sadist and I liked having 29 credit hours a semester. So,
Holy.
oh no, why did I do that? What?
Look, I get with working with the dead, but killing yourself in the process of going through college is a bit much, don't you think?
Indeed, but
Holy crap.
we don't often get these opportunities, so
Go on with your bad self. Like that's amazing.
honestly, hard real talk. I was going to lose my Pell Grant if I didn't keep up a certain amount of credit hours. And my last semester, the mortuary science degree wasn't going to be enough, even though I was a full-time student. So, because it's mostly lab hours at the end. So I knew all along that I had to take 2 concurrent degrees to be able to afford them.
Gotcha.
So,
Out of curiosity, what's a mortuary lab like?
depends on what kind of lab you're in. If you're in a school that's just teaching funeral services, it's a pretty standard surgical suite.
Okay.
Fayetteville's a pretty big school, and we're adjacent to a military base. I say we like I'm still there. I go all the time and volunteer, so it feels like I'm still there. Forever student. But it's quite a big lab, and it has 2 surgical suites, one that's just set up for autopsy and dissection, and one that's set up just for funerary purposes, but it's kind of all over the place when you're actually working. So
Oh, it's really cool.
it's depressing that in movies we always portray funerary workers, mortuary workers, and autopsy technicians as being sort of, it's always sort of dirty and dingy, and things are very sort of unappealing and sludgy, when in fact they have to be kept to surgical standards. They are very clean spaces, very well lit, lots of stainless steel, autoclaving everything. So very antiseptic. The only difference is we can't use any bleach because that's a quick way to die in a mortuary setting.
Yeah.
You know what, though? For everyone listening, if you enjoy things like wet specimens, which you should obviously clean and maintain occasionally, they sometimes have aldehydes in them. And if you don't know what kind of fluid is in there, and definitely if you do know and it's an aldehyde, you should be very, very careful in your cleanup. You should wash everything at least 6 times with just water. And then after that, use vinegar to clean, because vinegar neutralizes aldehyde. Ammonia as well, actually both. Ammonia works as well. But if you use bleach, 1 part per million of bleach touches an aldehyde, it will instantly create a gas that will convert all of the water in your lungs into acid. And it is a really terrible way to die.
Then you'll very quickly end up lying alongside who you're working with.
Yes.
And then you have to get someone else who's going through mortuary school.
I saw a professor once absolutely dress down someone from janitorial for bringing in just a mop that had been used before. Get out of here with that, because you're going to kill everyone. It's terrible. And if you live, you will have the worst life. I mean, your esophagus would be destroyed. So,
And not just because you got yelled at really bad.
yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it kind of feels like some old ritual taboo for having the place where the recently deceased start prepared for final rites, where like you can't bring in an old mop. It has to be a new mop that only gets used in this building because there's like the one magical chemical guy that like does not come in here. But I'd also might feel that way to me because I'm not particularly good at chemistry. But it's still a ritual taboo. Essentially, it's a ritual taboo that's also grounded in science.
Yes. And I don't think ritual taboos are not that. I mean, magic is just science we don't understand yet. So our taboos could all be born from places like that we just don't have context for. But that's me dorking it up. If you want dorky chemistry, though, a fun little detail for you, because ammonia neutralizes aldehydes. A lot of dialogue you'll see around particularly green burial today is about how aldehydes bad for the earth. Sure, you don't want to drink it. It's going to give you cancer. But most of the studies we have around that were soil samples taken from Civil War cemeteries when we were embalming with arsenic. So of course there was a lot of environmental damage from those processes. But today, aldehydes, they are natural. If you close up some fruit in your crisper drawer and forget about it, if you test the air quality in there in a day, it will be filled with formaldehyde. That does not mean you should consume it. Natural things can still hurt you. But ammonia neutralizes formaldehyde and other aldehydes. And what does your body produce as it decays? And what does your kidneys produce naturally all the time? Ammonia. So by the time you decay enough for the trace amounts of aldehyde in your body to leach into the soil, which would take many, many tens of years, because you're in a casket in a vault, it will have completely neutralized.
Suddenly feel an urge to ask Emily to make sure Sarenth doesn't go peeing on vegetables as they're about to go off.
Well, the amounts are so small in fruit, but it's just sort of an amusing way to illustrate where you can find those things in nature. It is a byproduct of decomposition naturally. So,
I mean, that really speaks to how kind of death and decomposition is just a natural part of sort of all life, really.
yes, I always try and encourage people to understand that. I think we pagan community, whatever pagan means to you, it's a big umbrella and most of us fit under it very uncomfortably. But whatever that is, I have developed some weird feelings, I think, about funerary rites, particularly ones you might receive from a funeral home. And that's a real bummer to me in particular. Reasons for that. One, unless you are affluent, green burial might not happen for you, even if you want one. Who here is rich? Definitely not me.
Yeah, no.
It's a whole lot of head shaking.
Yeah.
And yet we're still probably better off than a lot of people in the world.
Right.
Right. How many of us have had a loved one who has died tragically, maybe car accident or something like that? Probably all of us.
Right.
Green burial relies on someone having a lovely death that is easily managed so that they can plan and carefully prepare to be buried somewhere that's probably very expensive. There was a time when green burial meant backyard burials and very simple things, but today these cemeteries, I mean, your baseline price is about 10 grand. So they're very unaffordable. And if you have been embalmed, you can't be placed in those spaces. If you have a traumatic death, if you're under the age of 60, you are getting an autopsy in the United States. If you die in any way that is unexpected and you're under 60, you will get an autopsy. And most states have such a huge backlog for autopsy that you're probably going to be in refrigeration and you're probably going to be embalmed. If you have to cross state lines as a deceased person, you will be embalmed. If you have to be taken to another country. So there are a lot of circumstances in which it will just happen, whether you want it or have planned for it or not. So I think it's really important for people in our community to learn how to make peace with those possibilities and learn how to communicate with those industries in a way that is meaningful to them. Because even if you wouldn't choose it for yourself, you probably have a loved one that would choose it. So you're still going to have to interact with those people, those professionals. So a lot of what I do all the time is if people message me or email me and say, my loved one just passed away and I don't know how to talk to the funeral home because I'm a witch or whatever. And I don't know how to communicate to them what I need for my spouse or parent or child. Can you help me find someone and talk to them? So I'm on the phone talking to strangers, 4 strangers, helping them sort it out. And if we all learned how to have that kind of dialogue, then we would be in a better place, I think, as a community.
So
what are some of the communication gaps specifically that pagans face? Again, it's an imperfect umbrella term.
Sure.
But what are some of the specific communication gaps that pagans face when they're dealing with mortuary services, especially like more common mortuary services that do involve things like embalming or cremation?
Well, I do often tell people that embalming is and has always been a ritual. since the time of ancient Kemet. I mean, we've always done embalming. It's just people have always been looking for a way to preserve remains. And the way we preserved remains then is not that dissimilar to how we do it now. We're just using different words for what we're doing, and maybe the ingredients have changed a bit. If we're actually more gentle in our embalming processes now than they were then. We're not busting up your brain with a hook or anything. Like, we're not doing any of that. So it's actually a little more mild-mannered. But I think sort of just embracing the ritual aspects of what that process on the mundane end might look like, and knowing that you have options, and just sort of being able to talk to people. Like, I think that, I don't know, I'm very torn on this particular topic, because on the one hand, I super love Caitlin Doty and Ask a Mortician and that stuff. Love her books, well written, awesome. On the other hand, I really wish people knew that she was not an embalmer or a mortician. She has a degree that takes you about 6 months to get. It's a certificate degree in funeral directing. Most of her education would have surrounded learning how to sell people caskets. It's a lot of sales in that particular degree. You can look up people's licenses. You can look her up at the funeral board in her state and see what her degree is. So she's never done these things. So when she talks about them, she's giving people a fair amount of misinformation. And lots of people in my position have tried to gently educate her in particular. Like, hey, we could be telling this better. But so I think that accidental misinformation parade is kind of hurtful. But if we had better dialogue, better language around it, then it could close some of those information gaps. One is, Caitlin always tells people that you don't need a vault. A vault is there to keep the ground level for people's lawnmowers. It's not really true, actually. Who knows why we have vaults?
That's surprising.
Sarenth does. Anything given enough time is going to decompose.
Yep.
Put a body in a box and fill it with gas. What's left behind when that flattens? A big air pocket. It's going to create a sinkhole.
Yep. Sticky.
I have fallen in a sinkhole in a cemetery. That's a scary thing to have happen to you. It's mostly water and wood shards at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how pretty the damn box is before when it gets put in the ground. Everything decomposes. Is just a matter of on what time scale.
Right. So when we have someone who talks about it in such a derisive way, people forget that choosing a vault is actually a gift to future generations. If you knew your grandchildren were going to visit your grave and leave flowers, but might fall in a sinkhole, you would choose it.
Yeah, there's joining the ancestors is one thing, but personally inviting them via sinkhole is another.
Yes. So vaults are not something harmful for the environment. I mean, concrete's not messing anything up. But people don't know that there are U-shaped ones that just sit over the top. So you can decompose directly into the ground, bottom's open. Or there are ones that have holes, big holes drilled all around. So they create ground support while still allowing for natural decomposition. So I think those things are really helpful to know.
Especially if you're in a swampy area, though. Like, that's the thing that I think people forget, especially with the Ask a Mortician bit. It's like, on the one hand, yes, sinkholes, but on the other hand, sometimes, especially in really swampy areas, the dead will literally rise out of their graves if you don't do that, which is why you've got some cemeteries in Norlands where bones will float to the fucking surface, because a lot of these were pauper graves, weren't properly maintained, and to be perfectly blunt, they're from Black predominant areas, so the white folks weren't going to be chipping in the money to make sure the dead stayed in the ground.
Just as a comment, because I want to be fair to the folks in New Orleans, part of the issue here is that they're below sea level.
There is that, of course. Yes.
And also they have not performed interments in the ground, burials.
Right.
For nearly 100 years. So these are very old burials. Today, that's why you see all the little necropolises of above ground burials. So
yeah, excuse me. You're absolutely right. It's something that I get as somebody who lives in a predominantly swampy state. It's like there's good reasons for doing this. Not only the misinformation frustrates me, because I worked in the industry for a little bit, and just the sheer amount of counter narrative we had to provide to these poor people who have just suffered a loss
Yes.
was amazing. And like they're
Yeah.
walking up to me and I'm like, dude, I'm not the one with the degree. I'm just here to help.
And they instantly hate you, right? Like you may as well have been the Grim Reaper that personally collected their loved one. Like they need somewhere to put that anger, and you are going to be it. And like
Yep.
we're not talking about pagan stuff at all. We're just going to do boring mortician stuff this whole time.
But it's true because I mean, when you have unprocessed trauma and grief, and then there's a process that you don't understand,
Mhm.
you externalize all of that on the person who looks like they can take it, or
Right.
at least will take it.
You're the stranger in the circumstance, and you work for death. So there's that.
Mhm.
But I think
So-
too that there's oh gosh, totally threw my mind for a loop. There's there are no benign portrayals of funeral workers in
Mhm.
media. I
No.
talk about this in classes. Some of you at convocation might have heard me say this, but you will not point me to a book or a movie or a video game or anything where the necromancer, the funeral director, the mortician, the autopsy tech is benign or good. There's always something dirty or unpleasant or evil about them. They like steal from the dead. They've got pockets full of your grandmother's jewelry, right? Like, so they already expect you to be something ugly, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think probably the best depiction I've seen has been Anubis from American Gods, and he's still taking chunks of the corpses and eating them.
Yes.
I mean, I think on the sort of mundane mortician side, the only things that I could think of would be if you watched a show like CSI or NCIS or something, where they try and have that a bit more of a vaguely sort of clinical approach, and then the person's often kind of fun and quirky in their off hours.
Right. You're not allowed to be some kind of neutral though. Like if
Mm.
you're going to be good in media, you have to work for law enforcement or the state, and you have to have something unusual about you. You can't be an ordinary person and work with death. You have to wear bow ties aggressively or be
Yeah.
a thinly veiled goth girl or whatever. Like you have to sort of show in some way or demonstrate that you are not like everyone else.
So just thinking about your comment a moment ago, how much, if at all, do you see a separation between the kind of pagan-y stuff and your sort of day-to-day mortician funerary work?
None, zero. And they're the same. For me, every part of my work is ritualized. And I think, do we want a hot take? Here's a hot take.
Go for it.
I think pagan folk, what the fuck does that mean? I think we collectively stop short a lot. Privilege is a factor here, accessibility is a factor here. So grain of salt, this comment. But when a person says, I'm a green witch, it's very funny to me when you go into their home and they like, if they have a yard, there's no garden, or like if they have plants, they're all dead. Like on the practical side, what are you doing with that? What does it mean to you to be that? And like, I'm a death witch, I'm a necromancer. It's like, what work are you doing with it? What is the practical side of how that affects your life? So for me, it was about going absolutely as far as I could, ritualizing my work. So the magic came first, and the mundane work came after. So I always pursued it from that angle.
That's really cool, and that definitely kind of fits with sort of a common point that we make on the show here, which is kind of the theory is nice and the words are nice, but then how are you living it? How are you applying it? Where's the practice?
Exactly. And for me, I did the thing that, I don't know, I think most people when they're doing death magic, they start from the death doula end. And I think that's very appealing. Here's a very hot take. I actually make people mad with this all the time. So for all the death doulas listening, I love you. You do great work. I mean that sincerely. But there are no certification courses that you couldn't, if you wanted, finish in a weekend. And they're all going to be these like, take the online quiz until you get the right answer kind of things, right? They're not very thorough. And then you're instantly set out into the world to make business cards and go get some money. If that's the kind of person that it is doing the thing. There are lots of great folks doing tons of stuff. Caveats, this is not a hard truth. But I think that feels like a very easy way to do it. And it's a way that is sort of instantly rewarding. I have my certificate. I am this thing. I can even get paid for this thing. That feels great, right? I never took that avenue. I don't know. It just never occurred to me to do that early on, 20 years ago, because I am an antique. Gaze upon me. I started out volunteering for hospice. That was my early work. So I did, I call it night's watch, but they actually call it 11th hour care, where if the family just has to go home for the night and shower and eat and piss and shit in private or whatever they need to do, need to live, or that person doesn't have anyone, so they call us in to sit with them all night so they won't die alone, that kind of thing. So I've done that sort of work wherever I had space for it for 20 years, and that was my early thing. And doing stuff like death doula work never appealed to me, because volunteering for hospice is that. You are that. It is not different. You're just using different words to describe them. And a major difference would be whether or not you could charge someone for your services. And I've always been about giving away what I have. And there's privilege in that. I know that. But that's going to be the word of the day, privilege. But I always felt like my magic was about what I could do for others, not what my magic could do for me. So I've always tried to draw that kind of boundary. So doing that kind of work for years, and then sort of seeing how families struggled to connect with funeral services on the other end of that death, and just kind of seeing what that looked like for folks. That was when I started going, okay, how can I pay for school? We're doing this again, I guess. And making that part of my life, part of my magic, and here I am today.
That's really cool. The one thought I had as you were talking there was that I suppose on the kind of one big issue that we often have in sort of pagandom is the whole sort of imposter syndrome thing. Who's going to tap you on the head and tell you you're now a necromancer or a spirit worker or whatever? Whereas if you're working in the funeral industry or you're working as a mortician, you end up with a certificate that says, I am now this thing. And that is the nod on the head saying, and now you are, here is your validation, your confirmation. It's kind of really interesting to sort of think about how people are balancing that.
You do make a very good comment. And I think too that, I don't know, it would probably amuse a lot of people to know that I tell people all the time, if you have done any work with or for the dead or dying, you have done necromancy. Even if you were just standing in your kitchen cooking dinner going, oh, grandma, I've always really loved this recipe or whatever, and grandma's not with you anymore. Like, this is still necromancy, right? We do put a lot of sort of power in validation, but I think that validation isn't always necessary. The funny punchline part is that I always have that imposter syndrome. Like, I would be the first to lift everybody else up and validate them, but it's like, oh, I'm not real. Do I exist? Yeah, maybe, possibly. But rambling ADHD, but there's this definition of necromancy from the 1812 Webster's Dictionary. I particularly love this definition. I'll never forget it. Quote, necromancy is the purported art of communication with the dead. It's a great sentence. Fucking love that sentence. Because while being assholes, they actually managed to prove a very good point. Communication with the dead is the point of the word, if we break it down, even if that's not how it was historically used in ye olde ancient Greece. We won't go into that. We all know what it means. But it is somewhere at its core about communication. Communication is always valid, and we are not owed an answer. If I speak to a stranger on the street, they are not beholden to answering me. They do not have to have a conversation with me. I ignore my kids enough while I'm doing chores to know that shh, don't.
Yeah.
Take a minute.
As you're talking, I'm feeling a little bit of a tension in between these problems on the one hand, where institutions can provide structure that is necessary and good. It's part of how they become institutions in the first place. If you do not take the trash out, your government will fall tomorrow. It is It is a known fact. But also, like, I think all of us here are comfortable with the idea that when you institutionalize a societal need, there's always unnecessary negative side effects. And I'm hearing a tension here, both in how do you develop a practice and also in how do you provide services to the dead, dying, and bereaved, in a way where, on the one hand, it is good to decentralize things away from institutions in order to provide a powerful, moving critique of them, but also how do you turn that into an excuse to not do any work? And how do you ask that question without posing a threat to all of the little imposter syndrome babies who will take that question and immediately be like, oh, well, I don't have the right degree, therefore I am a fake necromancer.
Very
Ha
good.
ha 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 ha.
Said,
Can't compliment me.
I think there are multiple parts to that. Let's take them a piece at a time.
Sorry.
Piece A is going to be the funeral industry, right? Like, we have to look at the mundane side. And part of the issue here, the whole issue, is that it's a self-regulating industry state by state. I'm all for deregulating the funeral industry. There should not be a funeral regulatory board. There should be state statutes that set boundaries around it. But we have a few states that have deregulated their funeral industry, and it has been historically good, even though the National Funeral Directors Organization tries their very best to make it look like there are dead people crimes all the time. Like, if there's the tiniest bit of news, they cling to it like a life raft and they just spread it around everywhere. It's very funny. Colorado is one of them. Colorado is doing very, very cool stuff. They have open air cremation and lots of other things. Like, deregulating the funeral industry in that state has been awesome for them. I see everyone's eyes widen at that. Yes, they do, but you have to have lived in the state for a certain amount of time to benefit from those services, and you have to live adjacent, like the community would actually be doing the service. So they've put boundaries around it to keep pagan tourists from getting cremated there. Sad face. But lots of us are fighting for that in other states. So write to your senator about it. They won't listen to you because they're probably a Republican. Anyway.
I think it's really it's been a really wonderful thing to see, like here in Michigan, for instance, having more forms of burial become accepted and codified has been really nice to see. And
Yes.
At least for residents in this state, as many problems as there can be with the certification and the almost gamification of like death doula work and death cafes and things like that, I think for our local community, the death cafes have been an immense inroad to having dialogue about what death and dying look like. Especially in the local communities when before Crazy Wisdom in Ann Arbor shut down, the death cafes that were held there would garner 30 to 50 people, and it would be anybody and everybody from every walk of life coming together and like, okay, let's actually talk about the death process. And your books actually handle the subject in a very frank manner, and I appreciate that. Even when you're talking about rituals and you're like talking about handling components of the dead or with reference to the dead, it's not couched in terms where I feel like there's a distance attempting to be made. Like when I was listening to The Bones Fall in a Spiral, what's one of the things I kept picking up was that you're doing as much as humanly possible to not make that barrier. And I appreciate that, both as somebody who regularly communicates with their dead, whether you're talking about ancestors or the more generalized dead, but also as somebody who's worked in the funeral home industry. I think that part of the issue with having frank and honest conversations in our communities is the unwillingness to clinically and directly talk about death and dying and the death process and what you want done. And I say that as somebody who's had workshops on, hey, if you folks are serious about wanting your communities to thrive when you're gone, you need to have living wills and power of attorneys and all these other things lined up first And this is the pot cutting the kettle black because at the time I was going to do it and I haven't done it yet. So this is a kick in the ass to me to go get it done.
Well, we can't be friends if you don't do that and let me know you did. You have to all come back and let me know. Everyone listening is going to go do it, right? Yes.
Mortellus driving up to Michigan to go beat up Sarenth.
I get it.
I'll get my spear. Don't fight me.
Spear.
Don't
Oh,
stop in
yes.
Pittsburgh because then we'll have to have a spear battle.
Yes, spear battle.
I do boar hunting. I would win that.
Probably.
Ooh.
This is not.
I mean, if
I'm collapsing my whole office.
I mean, to be fair, if you can drive over the Atlantic to come over here, then I'll be impressed.
Well, I will be in the UK next spring, so
I have a deadline.
you have a deadline.
Oh.
It's too big to like do this meaningfully, but
That's beautiful.
I'm gonna have a 5 seconds of be completely unfucking professional and go get my spearhead. I'll be right back.
do it. I made
For people who are listening, Mortellus's spearhead is a darker metal. It seems to be some kind of steel or iron. It is a long triangular head. It seems to be attached to some sort of well-stained hardwood. There is some kind of decorative leather or it almost looks like twine attached to the handle for grip. It's a beautiful piece. It's also very tall. So
it's also very sharp.
yeah, mine is a temple sharp because I have to use it to do mass. And if I stab my priestess, it will be bad.
I live very much in sort of the woods, so I wanted a spear that if I had to fight a bear with it, I could do that. So
Nice.
And for the people without video, you're missing out on everyone getting their spears out and waving them around.
that
Mine's
happened
currently at the temple, so
it happened in another conversation I was having recently where spears came up and we all just exited.
okay, but now I have to ask the obvious question. Why do you have a spear? Are you training for the next Trojan War?
I'm a devotee of the Morgan, so there's that. But I just enjoy blacksmithing and that kind of work. I also do Ren fairs. So when I first made it, I was doing an almost Valkyrie-like character at the Ren fair, and I would carry my spear with me.
Because clearly you need more hobbies and jobs.
Clearly,
They
Yeah.
harmonize.
You don't do enough work, Mortellus.
I never sleep. That's the trick.
Ah,
Oh, I see. You have yours disjointed from the haft. Beautiful.
yeah.
Absolutely beautiful.
Sarenth has a little bit more of a rhombus shape to the head, and it doesn't seem to be attached to a staff as of yet.
No, I'm looking for the right wood. This is a practical and a ritual tool, and I'm looking for the right ash staff for it.
I'm
Sarenth.
lucky since I don't have to actually apply any force with mine. I like went to the tree of heaven carcass in my backyard, and I was like, I shall stab my theoretical enemies with the carcass of my former enemy. So
Nice. What's no?
Just Sarenth's rhombus-shaped head as he has issues with his shaft, and you're looking for some good wood. Whilst Cabra doesn't have to apply force.
Thanks, no.
But as to deadlines, yes, actually next May I will be in the UK. We'll be sort of rolling around bits of England and Scotland and Ireland for a couple weeks. So definitely keep an eye out on the socials. It's my first time coming over, so I'm very excited about that and
Nice.
trying to find my way to Rathcrogain on the last day. I told my publisher that they had to make time for me to do that, and they were like, we could do it on another trip, and I was like, you're not hearing me. I decline to do this for you if you do not make time for that. I'm poor. I may never get back to the UK.
fair.
Just make it happen.
Amazing.
Do you mind if I sorry, Snow, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I'd love to see you when you come visit on that tour, and I will treat that as my deadline to get a will sorted so that you don't beat me up.
That would be lovely.
Bringing your spear through Heathrow Customs.
That will be very tricky, but it would not be the first time I've dragged it around an airport. So
So what I was going to ask next is if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your experience with is it the Morrigan and Morrigan? I don't know anything about this deity.
I have vastly divergent thoughts about the Morrigan than most people, so definitely don't listen to me and like listen to like Morpheus Ravenna or Morgan Daimler. Both friends, lovely people, adore them. They're smarter than me. Go, go listen to them. Here's my thought. The Morrigan is a title, and it has been lots of figures throughout the history, lore, myth, as many as 5, but it's only 3 at a time typically. They're like it's like saying the Beatles, but they change out band members a few times. We switch them around. I use they them pronouns for the Morrigan, which is unusual because there's more than one of them. So why would we just say she all the time? They. I also frequently joke that a good way to remember they them pronouns is to pretend the person you're speaking to is a flock of crows, and that makes it very easy to suss out. Works for me at least. The Morrigan is a figure that I first encountered, or at least one of them, when I was 5 years old in an experience where I died. I did not know who the figure I encountered was until I ran away from home at 17 and found my way to ye old library. But I've remained devoted to that figure since before I knew their name. And they were a maternal figure to me in a lot of ways. And I know that is a very uncomfortable take for a lot of people. Not a parent deity, Mortellus. But I think that says more about what we expect of mothers and women. If the Morrigan cannot be a maternal figure because they don't possess X, Y, and Z qualities, why is it that we insist on applying X, Y, and Z qualities to mothers in the first place? We can be divergent in who we are and how we behave. I am probably a fairly aberrant mother to my own children. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having that kind of relationship with a deity, regardless what lore says about them, if that's who they have been to you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's that.
No, it does. I definitely have had experiences with deities that are wildly divergent from other people's lore, and I know other people who have particular takes with entities or particular experiences with entities that are like singular to them. But that's part of the reason why I tend to try and use verbiage like experience. And when I talk about lore, I have a tendency to talk about it as precedent, right? So for example, my relationship with Sophia and Lucifer is very tied to the Serpent of Eden, but also to Mary Magdalene. And that's a very unusual experience to have both of those entities referred to by similar names. So I definitely don't feel any discomfort in you having like a wildly different experience with the Morrigan than other devotees and people who have relationships with them. And I think that it's a living tradition, right? Every single person who steps into the stream is going to change it a little bit.
You made a comment there that tickled part of my brain. UPG, personal gnosis, experience, and precedent are 2 different things. And I think that we live in a time, a place, a world where people in the community we're grasping for validation, right? We're really grasping for, we are not the early authors of the pagan community. Looking at you, Scott Cunningham, just like making up some stuff, maybe hearts to what you did for everyone, books that everyone should read. And they definitely did a lot for our community early on, but now we're in a place where like, yeah, the history's a little wonk, and like maybe authors today we're better standards, citations and bibliographies, right? But as I mentioned in some of my books, that I feel that if we don't talk about UPG experiences as authors, at least, then we're never saying anything new. And then every book sort of becomes like a college essay about a topic over and over, where we're all saying the same things a different way and maybe sharing some opinions over it. And I don't think that's good either. Like there's a middle ground. So I talk a lot about, hey, here's precedent and here's my research and here's what I thought. Here's how I feel about it. This is what my personal practice looks like. This part is the UPG. Someone gave me a terrible review on Amazon on my most recent book, and it was like, this book is all like UPG. And like they did say when it was UPG, but I didn't like it being there or whatever.
Oh, Armchair Arnold got to you.
And they were like, yeah, they cite stuff and they like quote things, but then they like turn around and say what they liked or didn't like about it. It's like, well, that's what they're for. What did you expect me to do?
How dare you put your own words in your own book? What's wrong with you?
How dare you do applied research?
But
I,
what you were saying sort of tickled a thought that I had to give you all this like unskippable cutscene for. And the thought is like, how long before that personal UPG becomes precedent? If enough of us share our UPG, our experiences, they become the precedent. And them saying a lot of these words are the author's personal UPG. Well, at some point, everything we read was someone's personal thought. And I do want to be clear for anyone listening who has never read anything I wrote. I'm actually pretty well known for having 20 pages of bibliography, and I cite a lot, and I'm very clear about when something is my opinion. I at least try to be. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that those two things can coexist. They can live together comfortably, where you can say, here's a topic and here's what I've researched and here's all that exists and here's how I've taken all of those things and put them together and here's what my personal experience of them has been. Because if we never ever do that, we're never saying anything new, and we need new precedent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry.
No, I talk too much.
Okay. Reading your book, Do I Have to Wear Black? Which is available at all good bookshops. One thing that stood out to me that I really, really appreciated is how often you give the caveat of being Wiccan and your Wiccan background, but how you're still trying to understand the other sort of branches of paganism and sort of polytheistic religions and such that you're looking at in the book and giving each their own section. Sort of with, as I said, with that caveat of being Wiccan and coming from a Wiccan background, but trying to view each on their own merit, which I thought was really, really cool. Because I mean, you sort of see this sort of ghettoization across pagandom a lot, especially online.
Yes.
And it's kind of cool seeing things like that kind of knock some barriers down there.
I think too that like in the first book, you've seen there each chapter about a different group has a contributor from that community where we worked one-on-one to really create that chapter and kind of do the best we could to make sure that every person, including me, was understanding where that community was coming from. That was really important to me. I can't make words right now. It's terrible for an author. We'll write, but we can't speak worth a damn. That's ridiculous. But,
right. So you're kind of looking, going, well, I can't speak for
right,
Thelema or whatever, not being a Thelemite, but you could contact someone and then do it together.
Yeah, I worked directly with the OTO headquarters and directly with some individuals in the community who contributed their own words, and I think that's really important. And I do the same thing in this book where it's like, hey, some Wiccan framework has crept in here because that's who I am as a person, and I'm not going to feel bad about that. I'm not Wicca washing the book, but that's who I am, and this is a book about my practice, so of course it's going to be in there. And I think too, particularly for necromancy, because I'm always sort of talking about necromancy with Coptic, Greek, Roman origins. I'm sort of staying in that little area because there's so many cultures and communities that have those kinds of practices. I'm not part of them. I can't speak for them. And I'm not trying to distill them down into one thought. So when we're talking about that kind of European necromancy, an almost Wiccan framework isn't out of place, because that's always drawing from things like OTO and so on, and Rosicrucianism, which is drawing from those earlier practices to begin with. So they play nice together, I think. They're good bedfellows.
That's really cool. And I also like as well how where you suggest rituals or you have your different sort of recipes and things, you give the caveat of here's a sort of rough outline of what I'm doing here or what I would recommend. But if you can't get X, Y, Z, work around it, adapt it, make it fit your own framework.
Exactly. And I think that's really important. There's a book out there. I'm trying to remember the name. I'm going to Google it. I'm sorry for everyone watching who had to watch me Google a thing. What is the name of this book?
That's all right. I'm sure we do it often enough.
Here we go. I'm about to be terrible to this poor author. It was written by Timothy Roderick. It's called Wicca, A Year and a Day, 366 Days of Spiritual Practice in the Craft of the Wise. Who has ever seen that book? Anyone? Have you tried to work through it, Snow?
I haven't, but I've seen it. I'm pretty sure my mum had a copy.
See, there are a lot of people who start every year attempting to get all the way through that book. It's actually really impossible.
Right.
I never tried it start to finish, but I have sat down and tried to determine all the things it assumes you would be able to buy or possess. And you would need well over $100,000 just to finish that book if you wanted to do every exercise every day for a year, because it's these are what you need. You must do this, buy these things, and this is how you do this ritual. And I do think we need to stop and think, to what extent does having this specific exact ingredient really make a difference? And what things are there that we can change and still sort of measurably be doing the same thing? And I think the answer is a lot.
I mean, that also connects to your word of the day being privilege. And sort of there's a lot implied there and a lot of constraints we have to navigate. I know one thing that Cabra and I have talked about before is sort of people really holding to the letter with the Grimoire tradition or the Greek magical papyri and things like that, and sort of saying, oh, well, it says that I need to get a cat and drown the cat, and then I have to skin 3 goats and an ox, and then I have to get all this sheet metal that I then have to be able to carve into, and so I'm not going to be able to do this.
Right, we can't do that. Donkey semen, what store do we get that from? That shows up a lot in the
The weird
Excuse
one.
you, it was piss, not semen. How dare you?
semen shows up in there. I'll fight you about that. It's in there.
No, I believe you. I'm just being a
But
being
I
playful.
but I also know what you're referring to. Just very sad.
It was in there multiple times, and I'm still just like,
Meanwhile,
why?
my
Can we
heathen
take a
ass
look?
is sitting over here with the necropants going, what are you talking about?
We take a vague left turn into the fact that there's a spell in there that's like to enhance amorous feelings in your partner, like get a boner and put feces all over your dick. Like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, what? That's not helping you ever.
Somebody
that's
had
it.
a very, very specific fetish when they wrote that.
Oh God.
You'll definitely get their
Uh-uh.
attention. Yeah, you'll get their attention, but they'll be in the doctor's surgery with your attention.
Listen,
Don't worry, it's lube.
maybe this makes me a lazy person, but my favorite one is still mulled wine with allspice and ingredient X, and then you're set, right? Like,
Yes.
considering ingredient X is actually not a health hazard in that situation.
So we're doing Greek magical papyri now. Strap in, everybody. I actually really love recreating old spells like that, if possible. I do my best to get them just right, do all the crazy shit in them, except for the actual shit. I'm not doing any of those. Those are big no on that. But there's one in there that's for summoning a daemon, and you have to shave off all your hair. You have to sit on a roof all night. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that one once. I'm still growing my hair out from it.
Amazing.
Keep getting bad haircuts in between. It's the only reason. But
Are you able or willing to talk about the results?
sure, I'll talk about it. I'd planned to do that one for a while, but one of the ingredients you need is a hawk skull. Very illegal in the United States, so I was not messing around with that. But one day some roadkill made that convenient. So we're going to put this to good use and then give it a nice burial. We'll be done with this. Is it okay if the skull is still in the hawk? I think so. It counts.
Probably.
It didn't say it needed to be external to the hawk.
Yeah.
Yes, some pedantic jackass would definitely want you to be screaming at their funeral. That's bonus content for the listeners. But It said you had to be on the roof all night. You have to watch the sunset and the sunrise. The rest of the spell's pretty simple aside from the head shaving bit. But I wondered to myself, how tall were the roofs people could really get on in Greece in this time period? So I determined that my chicken coop was going to be acceptable. So
Hey, fuck it, it works.
it's a roof, damn it.
So my question is, okay, so with the PGM, you're talking about you're talking specifically about a Greek spell, right? What would a shaved head have meant for that culture? Because I know that at least one of the things that we can point to with Loki shaving Sif's head in the Norse myths is that this was something you did for adulterers or people that were like sleeping around. So I'm really curious. For me, anyway, I'm like, oh, I wonder what transgressive act this would have been to have shaved your head and then sat on a roof. I mean, like sitting on a roof is fucking weird for anybody.
So
all day, all night, but
you do see some head shaving in various ways. You see it for funerary purposes in Greece a bit, and in funerary ritual. So there's that. And then you see a bit of it for servants, slaves, serfs, that kind of thing. You see it a bit with exile, and you would see it a lot with widows. So I think since you're summoning a daemon, which would be a being that is providing you wisdom and knowledge, you being probably a citizen of Greece and having to be perceived as one of these lower castes, I mean, you probably get some wisdom from that. You'd be observed in a certain kind of way.
I mean, because I suppose with the PGM, because we're talking sort of Greco-Egyptian,
yes,
it's kind of that big whole North African, Eastern European, Mediterranean sort of smush. I should imagine that hair shaving is partially also a sense of sacrifice. You're physically giving something. I know in your books, Mortellus, you talk about sort of giving a part of yourself sort of physically at different points, especially when you go into blood offerings and things. But also, I suppose with Egypt, desert culture, it's a hygiene thing, shaving all your hair off.
Well, anyone who saw me at convocation heard me yelling about livers a lot. It isn't a sacrifice unless you rip out your own liver. You cannot reasonably give someone else's and it mean anything. You have to be willing to give something of yourself. In Egypt, hair cutting was also very funerary. You did see it quite a bit. You would shave off your hair and bury it with your love. It would be entombed with them. We find it a lot in burial goods. So interesting that part of this particular spell seems to be sort of a death, a grief, or like losing part of yourself in a way. Nevertheless, shaved off ye old hair and sat on a chicken coop all night with a dead bird. I watched the sunset and I watched the sunrise. And a lot of my night was looking at stars because I live in a place where there's not a lot of light pollution. So you can see an incredible amount of sky, which is
amazing.
So I got to enjoy that and try not to fall asleep because I'm old. And I managed it. And in the morning, fuck all happened. But but a crow landed next to me and tried eating the dead bird. They ultimately took away the dead bird, and I thought, that's nature, let them have it. That can be yours now. And after that, I did have an experience with a figure that took on the form of a crow. And they gave me a name, and they're my buddy now, and they're sort of I would like to use a word like spirit guide, but that would be a lie because the bird is an asshole and clearly has some kind of life of their own outside of me. I do not control them in any manner. They just sort of exist. But their name is Vide, which is French for void. And my best understanding is that they are made of the stuff between things. That is the best description they have given me of themselves. And they like a particular kind of gift for me, and that is really terrible dad jokes, for whatever that's worth. And that is my relationship with this moronic bird that does not actually help me very much in any meaningful fashion, but they make for good comedic relief when I need it. Thus ended my adventure with that particular spell. So
that's amazing.
maybe this is a rude question to ask a death worker, but I know one of the things that also comes up in the PGM often is little incense pellets made with animal brain. And in my head, I'm like, do you dehydrate the brain first? Like, this can't be practical. There has to be a secret step that's not in the text to make sure you're paying attention.
So, the brain is largely gelatinous. It's, it's a bowl of electrified jelly that is about the textural equivalent of the fatty bit of bacon.
Mm.
You can break it down much in the same way you can any other gelatin if you wanted to. I've seen bodies in all stages of decomposition. Perhaps Sarenth has as well. So you know that in late decomposition, actually the brain will start to sort of melt out of the nasal cavity. And if they have been left uncollected, like if they died in some unfortunate circumstance and weren't found for a few weeks or something like that, that will actually dry almost like glue. You could peel it off their skin. So I imagine that for those people, they learned pretty quickly that that kind of material would act in such a way. So I imagine it made a good binder.
Oh. Thank you.
They probably saw more people in just
gum and
regular,
modern incense.
yeah, it's regular decay, states of decay. And we don't get to see that a lot in our very sterile societies. So
Yeah, we don't get to see that a lot in our very sterile funeral industry anymore, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, like, because I've never seen a body at that stage. A lot of the work I did was mostly runs from local hospitals and things like that.
I'm curious suddenly. Were you transport? Were you funeral director? What was your particular?
So I was technically classified as a funeral assistant,
I gotcha.
and that meant doing everything but exsanguination and embalming. Like anything that the director could legally require me to do, I did. And
So more than they should have, probably.
no, not really. Like as long as it didn't fall under their licensure.
I know firsthand how they like to push the edges of that, as much as they can to get a
I,
job.
I worked for a really good funeral home where they were like very clearly like, this is the designated role that we have to do, that we will not require you to do. But stuff like fingerprinting was okay, direct handling, working with families, things like that, where stuff that I really grooved on. A lot of what I was doing was a lot of the interface work, because they found out really quickly that I have a light that kicks on above my head and people like to come talk with me. So he was like, cool, can we just have you like at every funeral and wake? That'd be great.
So a very important thing to know about me is I have never worked for a funeral home. I have worked in lots of funeral homes. Families call me in and I volunteer for them. I flash around my conference card. It's like, yes, I'm authorized to be here. I don't currently have a license. I'm fighting them for it. They're holding me to moral turpitude because I know I was outed by an author in the pagan community to the funeral board specifically as LGBTQ and as pagan, because they didn't like me, because they don't seem to like anyone. And I received a lot of harassment on the other end of that. It has never stopped me from working in the industry. Right. I am just a permanent volunteer forever, and that's fine. It's okay. It is what it is. I'll fight it every day for the rest of my life, but it's a thing. As such, I find myself doing a lot of very unusual jobs, mostly volunteering at state labs where we take in donors, indigent, etc., ton of unclaimed, body farm and that kind of stuff. So I have seen a lot of bodies in unfortunate states of decay.
Gotcha. Yeah, the majority of my experience has been through that funeral home or through personal family deaths, and mercifully, for the most part, they haven't been rough ones. Let me put it that way.
I've seen my share of rough ones for sure.
Like for my part, anyway. Much of my experience in the industry has been the social and spiritual aspects of it, where because I'm a funeral assistant in that setting, whether it's to setting up or taking down, or whether it's transport, there's a lot of the human interface that a lot of folks who've never been on that side of things just don't see. I mean, because you do the volunteer stuff, how much human connection goes into the death and dying process, into all of it. And it is, I think, a really underappreciated aspect of life in general, but certainly for the people that do the work, it can be really underappreciated just how careful you have to be with your words and couching terms and meeting people where they're at. And I have to hand it to my employer at the time, because I came right out and said, look, I'm heathen, I am pagan, and the death and dying process is sacred to me. And he went, oh, good. So you're not going to stand up during a funeral and witness to people? I'm like, no. Was this a problem? He's like, oh yeah, we had to fire people because of this. I went, never gonna happen. That's fucking horrid.
Yeah, it's rough out there sometimes.
And so much of this work is, you're literally embodying it, because if somebody glums onto you and you're at a funeral and you're with this person and they're in the throes of grief, what are you going to tell them? No, we can't talk, I'm working.
Exactly.
No, you're going to shut the fuck up and you're going to listen to them as they pour out their life story, or their loved one's life story, or 3 generations of life story until they're done.
You know, it's funny. You've probably heard this before, but there's sort of a common quip in the funeral industry that people get into the work for one of 2 reasons. I would argue that I represent a third, but I still fall into one of these 2. A, you had a very good funerary experience with someone you love who died, and you want to replicate that for everyone else. Or B, someone you love died and you had a very terrible funerary experience, and you want to make sure no one else experiences it. Those are more or less the 2 reasons. And to be fair, my reasoning of making sure there's representation in the pagan community definitely falls into the latter. I want to make sure people don't have bad experiences. But I did have a particular experience that I think you'll be amused by, Sarenth. My grandmother had died, and I'm largely estranged from my birth family, but I did have a relationship with my grandparents. So when she passed away, I did the bad for your mental health thing, which was come out of the woodwork and communicate with your family in the midst of a crisis. Terrible, bad for your insides. Don't do that.
Oh, shit.
Terrible. So here I am at this funeral, and it is a bad experience anyway. And everyone is turning it into an utter circus because I come from one of those families.
Oh.
And everyone that works in the funeral industry has encountered that family.
Oh yeah, they are a delight.
In the middle of this funeral, by the way, we all were told we had to leave, get in our cars and physically leave to a parking lot across the street as U.S. Marshals brought in my uncle, who got furloughed from prison. He was allowed to go in, view the body, and then he was shuffled out in his chains. And then we all got to return to the funeral. So it was one of those parades, crazy stuff.
Yep.
It's fights, there's fighting, it's the whole thing.
Yep.
I could not take very much of this. So by the time we reached the reception portion, which was at the same location, it's a tiny Baptist church. There's like a little communion hall or community hall just next, adjacent to it. So everyone's in there, and the smell of the food was just turning my stomach because it's all this drama, right? So I step outside and I'm crying. It's my grandmother. Of course I was. Kind of cold monster do I look like. There are 2 funeral employees lowering my grandmother into the grave. They are having a very noisy conversation about what they thought about her body because she was an overweight person, and laughing that she needed a slightly larger than average casket. They're making a great many jokes. Yes, it was very unpleasant to hear. And then the lowering device jammed and it dropped one end. And then they asked me to help them unjam it and lower it. Me, a stranger, obviously bereaved. Very not done. These are not things you do.
No.
But I figure this is the only time I'm going to be able to interact with this moment. And they obviously do not care. so I could step in and care. And so I did. I made a great many complaints about these two people forever, because of course I did. Who are these assholes? What's their
Yeah, fuck those guys.
those guys, right? But one of a long winding point, one of the reasons I really do enjoy volunteer work where I'm working with less than pleasant appearing dead is there is a general statistic that says, particularly if you are an AFAB person, if you are not pleasantly put together, you're not wearing makeup, your hair isn't styled, and so on. If you are in a circumstance where you need someone's help, they're not going to care about you as much. A judge, a lawyer, a police officer, a doctor. You will get better care if you are pleasant to look at. Terrible. The same is somewhat true for the dead. If you are a reasonably pleasant corpse, people will treat you with more kindness than if you are an unpleasant appearing one. And if someone like myself does not do that work, then someone is not there for you on your worst day. So being able to advocate for the dead that nobody else wants to look at, that's something I can do. And I try and remember what it felt like to hear people talk about my grandmother that way. And the only offense she had was being heavy set. She wasn't, leaking brain out of her nose. So.
I am sorry you had to go through that.
It's just an experience. Is what it is.
I know. I get it. Having worked in the industry around a lot of these things, it is amazing that people do not grok the idea that what you see is what you are going to become someday.
Yes.
And may you be treated better than you are treating this person here. Like the thing that so I have feelings about this, and this I'm not even related to this person, because I've seen it.
Remember, friend, as you walk by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you will surely be. Prepare thyself to follow me.
Yeah.
My good people, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, soon you will be. Prepare yourself to follow me. Stranger, pause as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. So kneel and say a prayer for me. Prepare for death and follow me.
We don't stop being people because we're dead.
That reminded me of something that probably only Sarenth will appreciate, but the funeral director's love of that ridiculous poem, The Dash. Sick to tears. Sick to tears. Every person wants to reference it. On a headstone, you have the date you were born and the date that you die, and all of your life happens in the dash. And there's a poem that talks about that. And funeral directors are quite fond of it, even though it's quite a bit cheesy, actually. And every dead person's favorite song is somehow Vince Gill's Go Rest High on That Mountain, which every funeral director will have heard 10 times that weekend. 10 times.
I grew up Catholic, so like it's really neat how some of these songs and practices that I did not grow up with, and because of the area I live in and work, especially while I was doing the funeral service work, a good chunk of the people that I buried were Catholic. So a lot of these songs I heard once if I was lucky. So I find it really neat that your experience has like been with like this particular cadence and this particular way of burial and song, because it is completely not my experience, even working in the industry for the most part, because predominantly where we live. And even those ones that aren't specifically a Catholic funeral, will borrow bits and pieces from it because not only because the Lutheran population around here is heavily influenced by the Catholics around here, but also just the general milieu around here will okay, well, we don't have a plan for this funeral, so what works?
I still remember having to learn for my national board exams, like all the different parts of the Catholic Church. And it's like, there are like none percent Catholics where I live. Why? But I know what a narthex is, and I'm all set. We're
Where are you supposed to face that body?
Does anyone mind if I ask the wrap-up question? Are we feeling comfortable with that? Moment of transparency, because we're all new with each other.
I'm okay.
Go for it. I was wondering if we could maybe squeeze in a couple of the community questions, but if you're looking at the time and sort of tapping your watch.
I want community questions.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot we had those.
You're good. Okay, so since we're on the topic of kind of funeral services and such, one that we had was, how as a funeral director, does one reconcile when the deceased wanted a pagan service, but their whole family is totally against that?
Oh gosh. There's a big debate about whether funerals are for the living or for the dead. Even people in the industry will have that debate. Clergy people will have that debate. You'll hear it in death cafes all the time. It's the whole thing. I'm not going to tell a story here that'll get me in trouble, but I have definitely made sure the dead got funerals they wanted after their family was done doing their thing. Technically crimes. So, but I think that there is a way to honor the dead while also operating within what is comfortable for the bereaved. The bereaved have to do what they can do, but I do think that they have an obligation to do what is of value to the dead. A funeral director is beholden to laws, so that's different. We're stepping aside from clergy and family. That's over here. The funeral director's only job is to do what the next of kin paid them to do. And a lot of times we don't know those things. They're not going to fill you in. They're not going to tell you as you're filling out the little request forms, yeah, by the way, this person was a witch, but we're hardcore Baptists, so ew that. Like, we're just going to do the plans that they asked us and operate within best intentions. Like, we're going to assume that they're being honest with us and have a charitable opinion of the person sitting in front of us. Because you are meeting someone on the worst day they have ever had. They are deeply checked out. They're very bereaved. They're doing the best they can to just get through this conversation. So you're not going to sit there and grill them. But we often find out behind the scenes, sometimes at the funeral, friends will be telling us these things, or we'll be embalming them and notice some tattoos that stand out to us, or any number of things might give it away. In which case, I personally will reach out to next of kin and just be like, I noticed some things. I wanted to make sure that we were doing right by the dead. Would you like to incorporate some elements that might have been important to them? But most wouldn't do that. For me, that would be a very real sort of ethical quandary, and I would want to ensure that I was doing something to honor that person behind the scenes. Even if the family wasn't agreeable with it, I would be doing it in the embalming room. And I always do a kind of last rites behind the scene that's sort of acknowledging whatever that person might be and whatever belief system they came from, so that we're covering all the bases. We're like that guy in The Mummy with all the necklaces, praying in all the different languages. I want to make sure that I'm covering some bases for that person.
No wrong answers.
Right, exactly. But the real answer to your question is that 99.999% of the time, the funeral director isn't going to know that they're not doing something the deceased would have liked, because there's not a real way for us to find it out. We're not part of their life. We're a service person, and we're going to assume that their next of kin isn't going to just lie to us. So,
so next question we got here, regarding necromancy. This person has said, I think some practitioners who would like to dive into it will scare themselves out of it before giving it a chance. What advice could you give to beginners who are curious but hesitant to take the first steps into necromancy?
I can do this question. I love this question. It's one of my favorite questions. And the answer is, you're already doing necromancy, I promise. Already, every day, constantly, 100% of the time. Every time you put gas in your car, you did necromancy. You run your vehicle on the bones of animals you're never going to see or imagine what they look like. Necromancy. Every time you microwave leftovers, you did necromancy. You have reanimated the remains of something that was probably dead to begin with, plant or animal. You have reanimated it to give it new life from which you could derive nourishment. You have done necromancy. If you stood there on Christmas Day and say, hey, Grandma, I really wish you were here right now. You did necromancy. You communicated with the dead. They don't owe you a response. And communication does not suggest a two-way conversation. You communicated with the dead. If you keep a little shelf with your great uncle Jeff's picture on it next to a candle and a model of his favorite kind of car, you're doing necromancy. If you helped out a friend with their funeral, you did necromancy. If you volunteered to go pick up groceries for someone bereaved, you did necromancy. The practice at its heart is very mundane, and it's very about living and respecting who we are and where we came from. Necromancy always operates on reversals. It's always about turning things around, the dead to life, and so on, right? So it fundamentally requires that we turn around and look at life. Just in the same way that fertility magic is always about decay, because it's always about dying. So don't scare yourself out of a practice that you're already doing. It's just about adjusting your perspective and changing your language a little bit.
That just reminded me of a question that I wanted to ask, having read your books, which is throughout both Do I Have to Wear Black and The Bones Fall in a Spiral, you refer to all of the dead and the ancestors and deities with they, them pronouns.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that.
When I wrote my first book, it's funny, Llewellyn actually asked me to change that. They were really annoyed about it. They wanted me to take that out. No, Elphus Levy is a he, him. So how the fuck do you know? Did you ask him? He's dead. I think that it is the most charitable interpretation I can take when talking about a group of people that I don't know personally. When we talk about the dead, we are talking about a lot of people for all of history. So I think that it is the appropriate choice. I think assuming genders based on someone's meat suit when you don't actually know the answer is fucking useless. And when we're talking about deities and other beings, why on earth would we make an assumption that a deity would be beholden to the shape of a thing that human beings try to cram them into? Very funny. I have this conversation with my spouse all the time, and it's very inappropriate. Strap. So we talk about like tabletop RPGs because we play a lot, and we talk about deities because pagan stuff. And this comes up a bit where we hear someone just sort of get mad because somebody is doing they, them in their role-playing game, or having different opinions about what shape a deity might take. And I deeply, deeply reject the idea that in a world where a person can drink a potion and change their gender if they want to, everyone wouldn't be queer as fuck. We can't get through a legend about Zeus without Zeus getting bored and turning into a goose to fuck someone. So why in the hell would you think that in a world where I can pay a wizard 1 gold to grow a dick, I wouldn't get bored and do it?
I love that.
So if you are an incorporeal being, not beholden to a body, why in the hell would you be beholden to genitals you don't even have?
Absolutely.
I could rant about that some more, but I will not do that. So that's my thought. I hope it made a lot of people mad.
Oh no,
Fight me about it on the internet.
Sorry, I
it
just
made all the people who should be mad.
Yep. The thing that I was just remembering some marginalia where there was like literally dick trees. So thank you for that mental image.
it is sort of a funny thing, especially when you're playing like fantasy role-playing games. It's specifically that. I don't know if any of you are that level of dork. I definitely am. Yay. It's funny when people get mad and say you're putting woke shit in your game or whatever
Yeah.
these dorks say. Because I just cannot fathom it. If you could go to the gas station and buy a potion that changed your gender, why would that sounds like a fun and different Saturday night to spice up your marriage?
Right?
My spouse was assigned male at birth, and they were like, yeah, I would definitely get a potion if I could just like have a vagina for a day and just see what I could fit in there. That sounds like a thing to do when you're bored. Like, you know?
Yeah.
This sounds like such a great teenager moment of just like, oh yeah, so my first time when I got bored and snuck off when my mom wasn't looking to get the gender change potion, I learned things I wasn't prepared for.
Loki decided to solve a construction problem by turning into a horse, seducing a horse, having a long love affair with a horse, bearing that horse's children, and then giving their 8-legged child to their father to ride as a mount. Oh, I just remembered it's grandson horse's birthday. The gods are inherently queer.
Yeah.
They just are. I mean, if we cannot get through these myths without finding shit like that constantly, like if you live an incredibly vast life, if you can even call it a life existing forever, literally who is stopping you from doing that? Just whatever you wanted. Do you think any of you could live 1,000 years, just 1,000 years, which is not very long, without just like completely mixing up your current sense of gender or sexuality? Just because you got bored even.
I can't even make it 38 years and not do that. So
Right. So like Llewellyn can fight me about they them pronouns. I think that it is a fair choice. I don't know where you were coming from with that, Snow.
Oh no, yeah, no, I really appreciated it. Yeah, no, thank you.
I'm submitting official paperwork to Sabazius that we should take the positive and negative, or the male and female saints lists, and we should merge them into one gender is fake saints list.
Yes.
I'll just be like, yeah, I can quote Hafiz. It'll be great. Gender is fake.
Gender is fake. Yes. And like, I don't know. I mean, there's just so much to rant about there because it's really very silly to me to imagine people getting so hung up on something as actually pointless as the meat you're currently occupying, because that is the tiniest amount of your existence. And holding deities to that idea is even sillier.
So one of the things that keeps coming up around again on issues of gender and sexuality in a lot of the circles that I travel in is archaeology, when they dig you up. Like, first off, if I'm getting dug up by archaeologists in 1,000 years, I want to know what in the flying fuck I did to warrant them digging me up. I'd like to know that ahead of time because that's boss. But
you existed in a place where Walmart wanted to put a parking lot. That's the answer.
You're not wrong. Walmart becomes Weyland-Yutani 1,000 years in the future. I can see it now. But for two, like, okay, so they sex me as AMAB. Great. And that tells them fuck all about how I lived my life.
I'm gonna tell you a secret. I know a lot of forensic anthropologists, surprisingly. I know most of the ones in the US. There's not that many of them. And I know a fair number of people who work in archaeology, and what they will not tell you is actually it's very difficult to determine someone's sex. Are we doing like bioessentialism right now? No, gross. To try and determine those sorts of things about a person from their bones, especially the older those bones are, most of the time they're guessing basing on the context of the things you were buried with. And a lot of the time they're wrong and figure that out later.
That's what I'm getting at, because like the controversy around quote Viking graves and quote with, well, we're not sure what the gender of this person was. Okay, like, first off, gender is a construct. Second off, what are you looking at, and what essential features are you trying to determine who this person was and was not? And then one of the funniest bits was when a whole bunch of people wigged their shit when they found somebody who had mixed gender clothing and representations in their grave and had Kleinfeld syndrome, and everybody collectively shit the bed because they didn't know how to classify this person. And it's
I
like, y'all.
I really hope people bury me with a lot of confusing shit, like a cock ring and a Barbie doll, and just like the future sort that out. And
Make it weird for whoever decides to unbury you.
I'm gonna be cremated, so there's that. But
oh, even better, like put like a sketch of multiple skeletons down in there with you, just to fuck with them. Get one of those giant ass like Lowe's skeletons, bury it beneath you. You know, my giants are beneath me. You know,
actually,
just fuck with them, have fun with it.
it's
Oh, man.
actually it's in my wishes, in my I'm dead now notes, that after I'm cremated, I actually want all my cremains divided up and added to salt and put into packets that people can order at a cost of nothing from my website, because I would like to disperse myself into the community.
That's badass.
It would just, after I die, it will be the only item available to order until it is gone.
So as we head towards the death of this episode, just to have a couple more quick community questions before you can do all your promo. So afterlife versus reincarnation.
That's not a fair question to ask me, because anyone that's listened to me talk knows that I don't think they're mutually exclusive. If anyone listening is unfamiliar with that concept, it's a very modern, very Christian take to think the soul is a singular thing. So those things can coexist. And I know that for a lot of people listening, they might have had an experience with a loved one and had some difficulty processing the idea that a loved one is both here and somewhere else. And maybe it felt for them like someone being here meant that something went wrong. But I think it's very important to understand that those two things can exist together.
I'm there with you with that. And the person attached to that, what happens when different worldviews around death interact?
I don't. We're asking big thoughts in tiny questions.
Yep.
One, I think that the underworld is not the way people picture it. When we picture like the underworld is Valhalla, or the underworld. I picked the easy one, Sarenth. Saw the look.
I mean, really, the underworld is just a series of tubes.
It was hanging right there in front of me. The underworld is the Summerland, if you're one of those witch people. The underworld is heaven. The underworld is hell. The underworld is whatever. I don't know. That would be really weird. It would be like taking a plane to America and all of America happens to be North Carolina. Right. Like you have to think of the underworld in the way we think of the earth, as a place that includes lots of places. So the Summerland is like Australia. I don't know why. It just is. Seems like a place that would have spiders.
Oh, that's why I don't want to visit. Understood. I don't have a problem with spiders. It's just Australia.
You know, the UK is Valhalla, and you know, maybe the United States is whatever. Like you get the idea. It's like a place with a lot of places in it. So I think that the idea that you are necessarily constrained by one idea or belief of the afterlife is unnecessary. But I also think that the idea that they are permanently separate is also unnecessary. Like when I died, I spent some time in the underworld. I was dead for a bit, if you know much about my history. 23 plus 8 minutes.
Oh, that's enough time.
Enough, yes, enough for a lot of brain damage that I very fortunately do not have. I see nods. Yes, correct.
Yeah. Good on you.
I flatlined after 4 days in a coma. They attempted for 23 minutes to resuscitate me, failed to do so, declared me dead, and 8 minutes later, I spontaneously revived. My time in the underworld to me felt like an entire lifetime. I don't think time moves the same there.
I agree.
It felt like living there 100 years. And in that time, even though I started out in a place, I traveled eventually. So I think the same is true for any of the dead. You can eventually just move around because you might be born in whatever town in North Carolina, but you're not going to stay there your whole life. You're going to visit other towns and start to understand there's more of the world and go places. I'm a big dork for quantum theory as well. I believe in string theory, which is barely even a theory anymore. We're pretty sure that's how the universe works. Gravity's still a theory. We know it works though. So I think that all these ideas are sort of coexisting.
Mhm.
And then at the risk of tonal whiplash, to finish on this community question, what's the funniest interaction with a spirit you've had?
Oh my gosh. Funniest with an incorporeal person specific.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Incorporeal human being. Okay. Deceased or living?
Let's go
I
with
would say
deceased.
dead.
Let's
Yeah.
go with deceased. Funniest. I'm gonna have to go with my friend's father. Now, to be fair, their father was not a great person in life at all. And the reason they are constrained to my home is because that was a gift I could give them so that they're not great for them dad wouldn't be in their space. I don't believe in malevolent evil dead. If you've heard me talk, you know this, but I do believe there are not good for you dead. And this individual was not good for them. So good old dad got a nice magical time out here at my home. But they died not that long ago. We think about seeing ghosts and they're all, for some reason, wearing Victorian English clothes. I don't know why. Like you run to put that outfit on before you die so you fit in with everybody else.
Don't give away my plans.
Get the right outfit on.
Yes, no, I thought that was just part of your regular dress.
Yeah, that's my plan. I'm gonna go get my top hat and come haunt you.
You don't think about like a guy from the 70s in blue jeans doing the electric slide in your hallway, though. Like that's a very different ghost. We don't imagine it, but that's out there probably. Well, their father died pretty recently, a couple years ago. So he has all the personality he had in life, and I knew him in life, and he sucked then, and he sucks now. And their idea of humor is very different from mine. They were very pranksy and Baptist, and for some reason had a fullback Anubis tattoo. Funny to make that blood contract when you're a Baptist. I don't even know, y'all. I see your faces. I don't even know. I prepared their body and was like, the hell is this? So just like Republican Deep South gun nut with an Anubis tattoo who dressed like an extra from Miami Vice. Like, this is the dead guy I have to deal with. He's gotten less crummy than he started. It's been a couple years, but he seems to very much want to be the kind of ghosts he saw in movies. So he's always trying to do his very best to jump scare me, but it's just sort of embarrassing because it's just somebody's middle-aged dad doing it, like, my bald head. So
Sliding across the floor into the doorway like Tom Cruise in Risky Business.
Yes, indeed. I always say that those movies like, oh shit, what's the one? Paranormal Activity, I guess, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Those kinds of movies, they seem scary. They're tense. You've got drawers opening and cabinets opening and things moving on the walls, but they're a lot less scary if you imagine the person doing them, right? The deceased person just going, so all the paintings, that's funny. Open the doors. You know, if you can imagine the person there doing it, it's not at all frightening. And for my eyeballs, that's all I get out of this guy. So my kids are like, why is the thing moving? Because that moron's doing it. That's why. So the fact that he thinks he's scary and in charge and like very serious, that's very funny to me. So I find it a very funny experience.
I'm surprised that the other spirits and dead that are probably coming through your home at various times for various reasons and various lengths of time do not at some point pull Bobby Ray, whoever, aside and be like, you're acting like you're 5. Can you stop? I know that you just got here yesterday. Can you stop being an embarrassment?
Oh gods, do ghosts experience cringe?
That feels like the title of this episode.
I mean, it is now.
Oh
Putting
my
that in
god.
the
Because
notes.
if someone tried that in my house, I know my grandmother, who was she was like a matriarch energy in life and kind of kept that with few changes afterwards, would definitely just be like, we don't do that here. Go clean something.
My spouse's grandma chills with us. And if you can imagine, like, narcissistic upper middle class, like white Connecticut grandma, that's like the vibe, right? And she will say things to me all the time, like, you had the twins after I died, just, to hurt me. Well, you're here now looking at them. She constantly wants me to get them baptized, which is very funny.
Yes, Grandma, because that's totally how fucking pregnancy works.
That's it. Grandmama.
I did it to
was her
spite you.
preference. Thank you. Grandmama. But her spouse passed away several years before she did. And though he does not hang out with us, her later in life paramour, Benny, does. And Benny's kind of pranksy, but he's also just sort of a delightful Jewish deli type guy. And he very much wants us to have a menorah every Christmas. And it's like, we're not even Christians, man. We're definitely not that. Like, that would be levels of incorrect here. We're not doing that. I'll make matzo ball soup if you like, though. That was very important to him one year. So we made the soup. It's pretty good. I liked it. So I got up into all kind of ridiculous in my house. Hanging out with the dead all the time is not very, like, important and poetic, I guess. It's often very silly because people are that, and they want you to be having the experiences they want you to be having, especially if there were older folks when they died. So
it's really fun when they send you with a shopping list and they want you to get very specific things. And you're like, I hate this shit. Why are you having me get this? Well, I really liked this when I was like, yeah, but I have to get rid of it when it's
alive now.
done. Like the circus peanuts thing. I'm sorry, honey. Like, your ancestors' obsession with circus peanuts, I will not understand. I will get them all the circus peanuts, but I can't.
I just expect you to continue the tradition after I pass. If you survive me, I want circus peanuts too.
If I survive you, I love how you put
I love
that.
them. I love circus peanuts. So
I love them, and my ancestors love them. And when we go out, there's a restaurant that sometimes carries them, and my ancestors will bug both of us until we buy some to bring them home.
oh my gosh. No, it's as far as funny experiences go, I think the real answer is just like watching people still be human beings with foibles in death, and them just like being the same kind of annoying you knew or did not know when they were
Or
alive.
like, not so subtly hit, hey, so you made that coffee, right? Can I? And they're like shaking the little ghostly fucking mug at you.
Oh yes.
Like, yeah, I can get you coffee. Speaking of which, that should be a thing.
Friend's dad is very upset that we don't possess a firearm. And it's like, no. He also
with a spear that big, why do you need one?
Who needs one? The year he died was very shortly before the previous presidential election. And it's like, I died before the election, so tell my son that he owes me a vote for Donald Trump, that he needs to place my vote for me. It's like, no one's fucking doing that, man. Literally no one. Nobody's doing that.
The dead are trying to make you throw away. Wow.
This is why I'm very glad that I can only talk to like a few select dead people, and most of what I hear the rest of the time is like food requests, right? Like, I just make the meal, they get the first bite, I eat the rest of it, and that's the whole interaction.
It's funny, Devin Hunter and I got into a conversation about this at Convocation, because I don't know if any of you were at the mediumship panel, but we talked a bit about the fact that we were a little different from everyone at the table because we had both been dead quite a bit. They were born dead. And I was dead a lot. So we're approaching mediumship from a totally different place. And I was trying to explain that I think mediumship's a psychic ability that I don't actually possess, that I'm still a little bit dead, and that's convenient. It's really the difference. And he and I were joking about how it's kind of the eye contact problem. Like, you're in the grocery store and there's a relative in there that you hope does not notice you. So you try and just But if you happen to make eye contact, you're fucked, right? Like they're definitely gonna come up and talk to you. So when you can see the dead like that all the time, you just really hope they don't also notice you. Noticing that
Motherfucker, I'm just trying to get coffee creamer at 3 a.m.
I'm trying to live my life, dude. So if they see you perceiving them, you're suddenly dealing with them. So sometimes that's like Kara said, it's a little different having that kind of level of interaction that you don't always want to be having. But
Amazing. Well, this has been really fun. It's been wonderful talking to you. It's been wonderful having you on.
I want to have you
great.
back.
Yeah, it would be great if we could get you back at some point.
well, next time we'll talk about actual magic stuff since we just rambled a bit about
Hell yeah.
yeah, that'll be fun.
Before we call everything, I would like you to plug your pluggables. And
Mhm.
where can people find your stuff?
I'm deeply, deeply like embarrassed of ever doing this. It's weird. It's right. Like, does anybody else feel weird about doing this crap? Like,
It made me do it for you.
perceive me. If you look up Mortellus at most places, you can find me. That's my website is mortellus.com. And you can find me on Patreon there, and it's where I hide all the embarrassing crap that I that's where I have all the fun stuff actually, and just like put things. I'm a crow and the dead at most social media, so you can find me that way. And that's my email, acrowandthedead@gmail.com, if you need to find me. Always happy to answer questions for folks or chat. I answer every email I get, good, bad, and ugly. And yeah, I wrote things. I have this, The Bones Fell on a Spiral, which came out recently, and the next one will be out before you know it. So excited about that. And if anybody is in, I don't know when this will air, but for anyone listening live, if you are in the California area, I will be at Feathered Outlaw the weekend of the 21st this month, doing some cool stuff. And then next month I will be at Austin Witch Fest. And I guess the next biggish thing people can find me at is Starwood. So I'm floating around a bit.
Awesome. Do we want to do the usual run rounders?
Yep. So plug your pluggables, beautiful people.
I can go first, as usual. SteelCityWitch.com is my blog. I am on YouTube under the same name. Yep, that's it. You can also see me on the Discord server answering questions and causing mischief.
Emily?
Streakingfate.wordpress.com.
All my stuff. Oh, sorry. Yep. All my stuff is on Linktree/SnowTheGoth. I am also regularly on the Around Grandfather Fire Discord server. You do not have to be a patron to join our Discord server. It is open to anybody. And if you want to support the show, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/AroundGrandfatherFire. Sarenth?
Oh, there's the unmute button. So I am sarenth.wordpress.com. You can find my personal work on patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. You do not have to be a patron to read my stuff, but if you want to suggest a topic or get a reading from me, that's where you can go. You can also find me on YouTube with Maleck Odinson for Three Pagans on Tap. And you can also find me pretty much on every social media. I am at Sarenth on Twitter. I refuse to call it X because fuck you. I am on Facebook. You can find Sarenth Odinson's profile on there. Sarenth@gmail.com if you wish to email me. So pretty much anywhere. On the Discord as well, you can find me pretty much all the time posting coffee, runes, and rune of the day type stuff. So please check out everybody's profiles, check out people's books. Please visit Mortellus's website. And I really want to express my appreciation for Mortellus, for you coming on and sharing so much time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, of course. And I do want to say one more thing. I always like to make sure people know that anything I have on my website, in my web store, if you need or want it and don't have access, just write to me. I'll make sure you get it. All my classes and workshops on my website are always pay what you want, even if that amount is $0. And if you need access to Patreon and can't afford it, there isn't a zero option, but if you pay the $1 and let me know, I'll send it back to you every month. So I always want to make sure people have access.
All right.
It is wonderful that you do that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work that you do. And having recently kind of reread them, I heartily recommend people check out Do I Have to Wear Black and The Bones Fall in a Spiral. And I'm excited for the next book.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed talking with you all.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire. And that's it. Thank you for